Do you eat oysters?
When I have them, master.
Do you eat snails?
No, master.
My taste includes both snails and oysters.
It's hard to imagine a film as massive as Spartacus having anything left unseen. But for decades, one of its most intriguing moments was buried, deemed too risky for 1960s audiences. A homoerotic scene between Laurence Olivier and Tony Curtis was censored, only to be resurrected years later with the help of none other than Sir Anthony Hopkins. But before we get to that, let's dive into the epic journey that was Spartacus, a film that broke Hollywood blacklists, featured behind-the-scenes clashes, and nearly saw chairs thrown on set. The film boasted an all-star cast led by Kirk Douglas as Spartacus, a Thracian slave turned gladiator who leads a revolt against Rome. Laurence Olivier played the cunning and ambitious Roman senator Crassus, with Charles Laughton as his political rival Gracchus, and Peter Ustinov as the cunning, self-serving gladiator trainer Batiatus. Gene Simmons portrayed Spartacus's love interest, Varinia, while Tony Curtis played Antoninus, a slave who flees Crassus's service to join Spartacus's rebellion. With the supporting cast featuring John Gavin as Julius Caesar and Woody Strode as the doomed gladiator Draba, the film had no shortage of heavyweight talent. The story follows Spartacus, a slave sentenced to die in a Roman mine who is bought by Batiatus and trained to be a gladiator. In the arena, he witnesses the brutal reality of Rome's entertainment when his fellow slave Draba refuses to kill him and instead attacks the Roman spectators, only to be executed on the spot. Inspired by this act of defiance, Spartacus leads a rebellion, gathering an army of slaves in an attempt to escape Italy and return home. Meanwhile, Crassus, the most powerful man in Rome, maneuvers to use the crisis to consolidate his power. Ultimately, Spartacus and his followers are trapped by Roman legions, leading to the iconic moment when his captured soldiers all declare, "I am Spartacus," to protect their leader. Though Spartacus meets a tragic fate, his spirit endures in his wife and child, who escape to freedom. Behind the scenes, Spartacus was as dramatic as the rebellion it depicted. The project was born out of Kirk Douglas's wounded pride after losing the lead role in Ben-Hur to Charlton Heston. Determined to make his own Roman epic, Douglas acquired the rights to Howard Fast's novel, only to discover that Fast's own screenplay was unusable. Enter Dalton Trumbo, a brilliant writer blacklisted by Hollywood for refusing to name names during the McCarthy era. Douglas defied the blacklist by openly crediting Trumbo, a move that helped break the industry's notorious Red Scare exile. The director's chair proved just as turbulent. Douglas first hired Anthony Mann, known for his westerns, but fired him after 2 weeks, feeling he wasn't up to the job. Enter Stanley Kubrick, then a young director Douglas had worked with on Paths of Glory. Kubrick, however, was far from an easy collaborator. He clashed frequently with Douglas, especially over creative decisions. At one point, Kubrick called the now famous "I am Spartacus" scene stupid. Douglas exploded in rage. But that was just one of many conflicts. Cinematographer Russell Meddy walked off set, complaining that Kubrick was micromanaging every shot. The actors weren't much better. Tony Curtis split his Achilles tendon playing tennis with Douglas, putting his scenes on hold for 5 weeks. Gene Simmons had emergency surgery, delaying production even further. Meanwhile, 8,000 Spanish soldiers were used as extras for the battle scenes, filmed in the sweltering heat of Spain. It was a logistical nightmare, but the result was nothing short of breathtaking. Another lesser-known detail involves the rivalry between Charles Laughton and Laurence Olivier, two of Britain's most celebrated actors, who played the Roman senators Gracchus and Crassus, respectively. Their animosity went back years, and their behind-the-scenes tension bled into their performances. Peter Ustinov, who played Batiatus, later joked that he had to act as a diplomatic buffer between the two, ensuring their scenes together weren't completely derailed by their mutual disdain. At one point, Olivier even tried to sabotage Lawton's upcoming performance as King Lear by giving him a stage diagram marked with supposed dead zones where his voice wouldn't carry. Lawton, in turn, graciously accepted the advice, only to later whisper to Ustinov that he was certain those were, in fact, the best places to be heard. Their professional one-upmanship added an extra layer of authenticity to their on-screen political maneuvering. One of the film's biggest battles wasn't fought on the battlefield, but in the editing room. The infamous snails and oysters scene, in which Crassus subtly propositions Antoninus, was deemed too suggestive by the censors. The metaphor, where Crassus claims his taste is not limited to either snails or oysters, was an unmistakable nod to bisexuality, a topic Hollywood wasn't ready to tackle openly in 1960. The scene was cut, vanishing from public view for over 3 decades. Fast forward to 1991. Spartacus was undergoing a major restoration, and the long-lost scene was rediscovered. There was just one problem. The original audio had been lost. Tony Curtis was still around and able to re-record his lines, but Laurence Olivier had passed away. Enter Sir Anthony Hopkins, who was recommended by Olivier's widow, Joan Plowright, as the perfect man to replicate his voice. Hopkins, who had trained under Olivier at the National Theatre, flawlessly dubbed the missing dialogue, allowing the scene to finally be reinstated. The restored version gave audiences a chance to see Spartacus as it was originally intended, with all its political subtext, violence, and daring storytelling intact. The film's legacy goes beyond its box office success. It helped bring an end to the Hollywood blacklist, proved that historical epics could have both spectacle and substance, and showed the raw power of a story about defiance and freedom. And yes, thanks to a certain Mr. Hopkins, we finally got to see a scene that once terrified censors. Now it's time to hear from you. Had you heard about the lost snails and oyster scene before? Do you think it was ahead of its time, or do you think Hollywood was right to cut it back in the day? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.